Okay, let's get into how demand and supply curves really work. First, forget the idea that these curves are just pictures of what happened in the market. They're not. They're models. They're tools economists use to understand how buyers and sellers behave when prices change, assuming everything else stays the same. That assumption, everything else staying the same, is called ceteris paribus. It's like a lab experiment. You isolate one variable, in this case, price, and see how quantity responds. So what is a demand curve? It's a schedule that tells you how much of a good consumers would want to buy at different prices, assuming their income, tastes, and everything else don't change. And the supply curve? Same idea, but from the seller side. It shows how much producers would be willing to sell at different prices, again, holding everything else constant. Now, why does the demand curve slope downward? It's all about marginal benefit. The first unit of something, say your first cup of coffee in the morning, gives you a lot of satisfaction. The second? Still good, but not as much. By the time you're on your fourth or fifth, the extra benefit you get from one more cup is pretty low. That's diminishing marginal utility. So to get people to buy more, the price has to fall. That's why the demand curve slopes down. There are two effects behind this. One is the substitution effect. If coffee gets cheaper than tea, people switch to coffee. The other is the income effect. If coffee gets cheaper, your money goes further, so you might buy more. Both effects push quantity demanded up when price goes down. But be careful, a change in price moves you along the demand curve. A change in income, preferences, or the price of related goods shifts the whole curve. That's a big difference. Movement along is not the same as a shift. Now, the supply curve. Why does it slope upward? Because of marginal cost. Producing the first few units of something is usually cheap, but as you produce more, it gets harder. You might need overtime labor, more expensive inputs, or less efficient machines. So the cost of making each additional unit rises. That's increasing marginal cost. And firms will only produce more if the price rises to cover that higher cost. In competitive markets, firms are price takers. They produce where price equals marginal cost. Again, a change in price moves you along the supply curve. But if input prices rise, or technology improves, or new firms enter the market, the whole supply curve shifts. Now, let's talk equilibrium. That's where the demand and supply curves intersect. At that price, the quantity buyers want to buy equals the quantity sellers want to sell. No one has an incentive to change their behavior. If the price is too high, there's a surplus. Too much supply, not enough demand. Sellers lower prices. If the price is too low, there's a shortage. Too much demand, not enough supply. Buyers bid prices up. The market naturally moves toward equilibrium. Let's do a quick example. Suppose demand is Q equals 100 minus 2P, and supply is Q equals 20 plus P. Set them equal. 100 minus 2P equals 20 plus P. Solve for P. You get P equals 26.67. Plug that back in, and you get Q equals 46.67. That's your equilibrium price and quantity. Now, elasticity. That's how responsive quantity is to a change in price. For demand, it's the percent change in quantity divided by the percent change in price. Demand is more elastic when there are lots of substitutes, when the good is a luxury, or when it's a big part of your budget. It's less elastic when there are few substitutes, it's a necessity, or it's a small part of your spending. Supply elasticity depends on how easily firms can change production. In the short run, supply is usually inelastic. Factories and equipment are fixed. In the long run, firms can expand, new firms can enter, and supply becomes more elastic. Elasticity matters because it tells you how much price and quantity will change when demand or supply shifts. It also tells you who bears the burden of a tax. The more inelastic side of the market bears more of the tax. Now, what happens when things change? Say income rises and demand shifts right. If supply is elastic, quantity increases a lot and price rises a little. If supply is inelastic, price jumps a lot and quantity barely moves. Or say there's a drought and supply shifts left. If demand is elastic, price spikes. If demand is elastic, quantity falls more than price rises. Let's talk welfare. The area under the demand curve and above the price is consumer surplus. It's the extra value consumers get. The area above the supply curve and below the price is producer surplus. That's the extra revenue producers get over their costs. Total surplus is the sum of both. It's maximized at equilibrium, but if you impose a tax or a price control, you reduce total surplus. That loss is called deadweight loss. Now, policy. A price ceiling, like rent control, set below equilibrium, causes a shortage. More people want apartments than landlords are willing to rent. A price floor, like minimum wage, set above equilibrium, causes a surplus, in this case, unemployment. A tax creates a wedge between what buyers pay and what sellers receive. It reduces quantity traded and creates deadweight loss. A subsidy does the opposite. It increases quantity traded but costs taxpayers money. But the model isn't perfect. In real life, markets aren't always competitive. Monopolies set prices above marginal cost, creating inefficiency. Prices can be sticky. Firms don't always change prices instantly. There are externalities, like pollution, that the market doesn't account for. There's information asymmetry. One side knows more than the other. And people aren't always rational. Behavioral economics shows that consumers can be influenced by framing, anchoring, and loss aversion. Digital goods are another wrinkle. They often have near zero marginal cost. That changes the shape of the supply curve. And platforms like Amazon or Uber operate as two-sided markets, where value depends on the number of users. Finally, when you look at real-world data, you don't see the curves. You see equilibrium points, price and quantity combinations where supply and demand intersect. To estimate the actual curves, economists use tools like instrumental variables and natural experiments to isolate shifts in one curve while holding the other constant. So next time you see a supply and demand diagram, ask, is this a movement along a curve or a shift in one? Which curve is shifting? What are the elasticities? What's the time frame? Is the market competitive? Are there frictions or interventions? Are there externalities or information problems? Because demand and supply curves aren't just lines, they're a language, a way to understand how people make decisions, how markets coordinate those decisions, and how changes ripple through the system.